Third to the last session of the week. Y'all had a good week so far?
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So we're going to, if y'all wouldn't mind catching that door right there, and then it'll be a little less loud. So officially welcome to Take Your XPages development to the next level. I'll be presenting with Mr. Brad Balasadis and Paul Calhoun to kind of do the introduction thing. Brad, take it away.
My name is Brad Balasadis. I'm fortunate to work with the great team of developers at PSC Group.
With the exception of Mark.
Right.
Right.
Well, I said developers, not.
Oh, okay.
Certified in
Well, that just changed my tweet.
bad timing, I guess.
No, that's what he's going to say.
So I've been certified in every version of Notes developer, since version 4. Honored to have been named an IBM champion the past couple years, and done a fair amount of speaking and writing and blogging about XPages development over the past couple of years.
Excellent blog, by the way. He doesn't really toot his own horn there, but excellent blog there. Go see that if you want to learn things. So I've been around for a long time. They refer to me as the old guy now, and I'm not really sure I like that. But lots of experience with Notes and Domino. Lately, about 3 years ago, me and a gentleman named Russ Mayer, you might have known, started a company called Due Diligence. We have a hosted XPage application that we run in software. Allows companies to gather information from their board of directors for filing their Schedule K. That's pretty much what I do full time now. Do some XPage consulting for a local company there in Houston. If you see anything about me, then you'll notice that mostly what I do is play with 4 wonderful grandkids. So, and I knew you would want to see pictures. So, that's the oldest and the youngest together, and that's Asterion and Thea, and he's teaching her how to use the phone. That's the middle girl. That's my daughter. Crocheted that. If you want to buy one, let me know, because I would really like for her to be more employed. Okay. This is the youngest grandson. He's kind of rocking the hat there. That's good. I've got another 1,000 pictures, and then I'll turn it back over to Brad. You're nervously laughing because you don't know what's next. Does he really? Yeah, no, they're mine. I have some. They're on my phone though. So if you'd like to see those, let us know. We'll transition over to those. So Mr. Balasadis, if I can figure out how this works, is going to now kick it off and wow you with application responsiveness.
So I have kid pictures too, but I have so many kids it would take the whole time to go through it. So. All right, so here's our agenda for today. The session is Take Your XPages development to the next level. Our goal here is really to kind of dig in and highlight some features that are already available in the platform, just things that are not as widely known or used. So what we want to do is, our goal is to give you some things you can walk away with and use immediately. So this is the agenda for today. Anyone who knows me at all would not be surprised I'm way over prepared, so we don't have any shot of getting anywhere close to through this, but even whatever we don't cover will be on slides that are available afterwards, and if there's any questions, always feel free to reach out.
5. We'll get through 5. Just set that expectation.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
You didn't start the timer, so we didn't know that. So we're going to start by talking about application responsiveness. And if I use the term responsive applications, a lot of times what comes to mind is some kind of a UI framework that allows your application to look good on different screen sizes. Okay, that is a very important part of application development, but that's actually not what I'm going to focus on right now. Okay, which is why I worded it kind of the other way. So, because you know that it doesn't matter what your UI framework is, if your application doesn't respond, right? Nobody cares if this was, if this was done in Java or JavaScript. Nobody cares if that's a Bootstrap interface. Nobody cares what's going on behind the scenes. All we know is that this irritated every person that tried to use it, and it had a bad reputation. So that's what we want to avoid with your applications, right? You don't want all your great work to go to waste, all the cool logic and interface stuff that you put in place, to immediately have just a bad feedback from all the users who don't want to use it and complain about it because they're taking a while just waiting for it. Okay, so I want to focus on some ways that we can keep the application functionally responsive. Right, so by that I mean we want to minimize the amount of requests that go to the server as much as we can. We want to minimize the amount of time that the application is blocked. Right? We don't want the user sitting there frozen just waiting for something to happen. And then, also limit the amount of page refreshing that's happening as much as we can. So to start to do this, we want to kind of keep an eye on where can we offload server-side processing to run on client side, right? Because if we do that, it's not subject to the network latency. It's not, the user's not waiting for something to happen on the server and then transfer back. We want to prevent page submissions where possible, execute stuff on the client side wherever we can. And when we do hit the server, do it asynchronously so the user's not sitting and waiting for us. So what I think is one of generally the best kept secrets of XPages is the JSON RPC control. How many people in here have used JSON RPC? Okay, good amount. But there's still probably 2/3 that haven't. So I think this is a phenomenal feature that, again, a lot of people just aren't even aware of in XPages. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about what it's about and how it is such a beneficial feature. So RPC means remote procedure call. Okay, that's basically you can use client-side JavaScript code to trigger something to run on the server. Okay, so it's calling it remotely, it's happening. The cool thing is this happens asynchronously. So the user is not blocked, the page isn't frozen, they're not waiting for something to come back. Okay, it happens asynchronously, so your process can go off and it can happen, and then come back, and interact with the user if it needs to, but if not, the user just moves on, and they don't even have to know it's running. So because it's not submitting the whole page to the server and blocking the user, it's much faster. Okay, and the RPC procedure is very simple to set up and use. Okay, it's a standard web thing, JSON RPC. There's a whole specification for it. It's implemented in XPage, and it's actually even a little simpler to use in XPages than it is outside. So RPC methods, they can take parameters. They can send responses from the server back to the client. So you can have true client server-side code interaction. Right? Your client-side code can kick something off. It can run on the server. The server-side code can send information back, and the client-side code can actually wait for it. With the callback, it's waiting for a response, and then you can act on it. Okay? So it is very, very handy, very efficient. Just two things to keep in mind. Because the page is not getting submitted to the server, the RPC method generally is not going to be aware of changes that happen on the page. Right? And that makes sense because we're not taking the time to send a whole page. Now the good news is you can easily mitigate that by just reading a value out of a field and passing it to the RPC method so it has the information that it needs. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you make changes to the in-memory current document with a remote procedure call, it's generally not going to be saved. Now, have asterisk next to that, there's a long explanation that Tim Triponi did a great job of explaining. That is true or not based on page serialization settings. So just go into the assumption that it's not going to be preserved, but you can work that out if you need to as well. So do a quick demo here. All right, so here I've just got a very, very simple XPage. We've got a form with a couple of fields on it and a computed text. But just to kind of highlight everything that's going on, I put a bunch of print statements on a lot of places on these things. So on rendered formulas, on validation formulas, on the lookup for the combo box choices, things like that, so we can actually take a look at what's going on behind the scenes. Now with this first button here, so I just have this simple form. I've got this button. All it does, there's no logic behind it, all it does is trigger a partial refresh on the phone number field. Okay, so nothing exciting, nothing really happened on the page. But what I want to do is show you what's going on here. If I look at the post that happened here, just by refreshing that, we can see that it took all these fields on the form and submitted them anyway. So even though all I told it to do is partially refresh one field, it's sending all that stuff to the server anyway. It's submitting the entire form, which is a lot of overhead that's just unnecessary. So if we look at the response that comes back, okay, that's what I was expecting because all I wanted to do was refresh that one field, so that's all the HTML that I got. Okay, that part in and of itself is fine, but what you don't realize is that the entire page is processing. So you scroll to the right spot here.
Same with the partial execute.
No, this is not. This is by default a partial refresh. So we can see here again all these print statements that are happening. Again, all I did was trigger a partial refresh on one field. You can see the after restore review event is going, the data context computes, rendered formulas for every field compute multiple times, data context again, rendered formulas again, custom validation, rendered formulas again, required formulas, rendered formulas again, combo box values, data context 5 more times for some unknown reason, rendered formulas again, and it keeps going. Right? And then we have the before render response event, and then we have our data context again, and then because the only thing being re-rendered is the phone number, we can see that's why you get one more time through rendered and required functions running for those again as well. Okay, so this is a ton of overhead when all I wanted to do was refresh one field.
Why is it doing that?
It has to do with the whole JSF lifecycle. So basically, you're only refreshing part of the page, but what's happening is you have to kick off the whole lifecycle. So it's got to process everything on that page in all the other, right, as Howard's presentation showed, up to 7 times. There's 6 lifecycle events. The partial refresh only improves the last one. So the whole rest of the page runs, all the logic, everything that's on there is happening over and over again, even though all you're expecting is one field to be refreshed. And that's all that you see, but there's just a lot of wasted overhead that happens in the meantime.
It seems like whenever anything's something bad in XPages, the reason is because of this JSF lifecycle.
Well, it does a lot. That's why it's good to understand what's triggering what to happen and how we can trim that down.
We said if you have partial execute on, it doesn't do that.
Right.
So it's how you implement it.
But you have to have you have to have it within the same panel or whatever, right?
Yes.
So,
Right, you have to scope it. Partial execution definitely cuts down on a lot of it. It trims the logic to happening within a certain targeted area, but it will still run the full life cycle on everything within that area. Now, to highlight the difference, what I want to show is I have another button here that all it does is trigger a JSON RPC method. Now, in this case, it's a very simple remote procedure call that all it does is print a line to the server. But just to see how we can, from the client side, trigger something on the server, and just to look at the difference in what's happening here. So again, you're not going to see a difference because nothing's happening on the page, but what I want to show you is that in comparison to the other one that had to submit the entire form and a bunch of extra stuff, this is kind of getting cut off, the JSON RPC, this is all it sends to the server, is JSON with a method name and any parameters that you trigger. Okay, that's all that it's sending, and what comes back is just JSON with a result and an ID number. And you don't even have to care about the ID number because XPages handles linking the request and the response back together for you. So you can already see just how much more streamlined it is to send something with JSON RPC. More importantly, let's take a look at what's happening on the server here. All that happened in this case is restore view and the data context computed one time, and then I got my print statement out of the RPC method. Okay, so far, far, far more efficient for a number of reasons. All that processing is not happening, all that refreshing is not happening, all that stuff. So, this just kind of helps visualize how much more efficient this process is.
What if you have to update the, like in the first example, you did partial refresh because you had to have something update. What happens if this comes back with the RPC and you still have to update something on a page?
Sure, well, you can do it client side. So in this example here, I've got another RPC method that a lot of times the way I'll use this is client-side code, trigger something on the server, get some kind of a response, and then I have that on the client side. One thing you could do, you could either trigger an XSP partial refresh get or post on a small area, which again would have a lot of inefficiency, but it would do the job. Or you can get that value back and in client-side JavaScript say, set a field name, or do whatever else you have to do on a page. So this example, I've attached with a callback. It's running for a few seconds, and then when it comes back, I got a message from the server. I popped it up with, in this case, I'm using dgrowl. It's a Dojo plugin to just display a message. Comes up on the side of the screen, very unobtrusive. So no matter what had to happen on the server, even though that took a few seconds, nothing was blocked on the screen. None of the excess page refreshing was happening. It was a very efficient process, yet I was able to get something back from the server and then take action when it came back. So in that case, if I had to update some fields, I would have passed that back and then just used client-side JavaScript to set that field. So it's a far more efficient process. Okay, so now we've kind of seen it in action and can understand, how it's so helpful with efficiency. We'll talk a little bit about, the RPC control and how to use it. Now, essentially, it was part of the extension library, and it's been in there since 8.5.2. With 8.5.3, there was that extra upgrade pack 1 installation that put a subset of the extension library into XPages. So with 8.5.3, if you've got that upgrade pack 1, the RPC control is available there. Otherwise, if you're on Notes 9, it's baked right in. So any of those configurations that you've got available, it's in the data access drawer of the controls palette, and it's called remote service. Okay, now the tag is JSON RPC service, but the control on the service is called remote service. So this is what a simple RPC method looks like. Okay, now I've highlighted here in line 1, you define the service name. And that's important because basically that becomes a global variable on the page that you can use to refer to it with your client-side JavaScript. Okay, so we name the service, and then we put a remote method in there and give that the name. And this was the example that I had that just has a print statement that runs on the server. Okay, so this is SSJS code in this method. And then as we can see at the bottom here, all I need to do is call this is rpctest.myMethod. And basically that's service name.method name. Okay, so that's how we can kick that off. Now it's important to know that when you're using this control, you want to use this property editor icon to put any code in here. If you use the blue diamond like we're kind of used to for computing things, it will actually kind of compute your code, and that's not going to end up the way you want it to. So, so be aware that you want that property editor. However, that property editor is basically just a plain text window. It's not a nice editor. It doesn't give you any help for anything. Pain for debugging. So what I would highly recommend is that you use that property editor to put one line in to call a function that sits in a library. Okay, just to keep it nice and simple. Now, to add a lot more functionality to it, again, I was saying you can attach a callback. So you could just kick something off on the server and forget about it, but you get a lot more use out of it if you kick something off on the server, get some information back, and then do with it whatever you need to. So in this case, you'd have a remote method. It needs to return something, and then when you call it, it's this service name.method name.add callback, and then you have the first argument here in your callback function. It doesn't matter what you name it, but that's going to get whatever response the server sends. Okay, so in this example I had egrowl in there. I had a notification, and what I sent as the notification was whatever the server sent back. Okay, so it was true client and server side code interaction, done very efficiently in a way that didn't stop the user to have to wait for it. And so, and as we saw in the dev tools, all that gets sent to the server is just this JSON with a method name and any parameters, and then what comes back is just a result. Okay, so very efficient communication back and forth. It's as minimal as it can be. Okay, so that was JSON RPC. That's one way to trigger code asynchronously client-server side. Along with this same vein of trying to offload things to client side and run asynchronously when possible, another option we have is AJAX and custom REST services. Okay, so you have the ability to use AJAX, which stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. In reality, at this point, it's much more JSON than XML, but either way, it works fine. But the whole concept of it is that it's client-side JavaScript code. You send some kind of a request out to a server, and it runs asynchronously, and then whenever it comes back, there's a callback function waiting for it. Okay, so a lot of times what we'll do is we'll pair this with a custom REST service in XPages, and that will provide us either some data for a view or some type of lookup or information that we're looking for, so we can send that off to run on the server, not have to wait for it, but whenever it comes back, we can address it and deal with it. So here's a simple example with Dojo AJAX. So line 2 here is the URL that it's pointing at. So again, a lot of times that'll just point at a REST service. That's where the call is going to get made. Line 3 is telling us we're expecting JSON data back. And line 4 is this load property. And basically that's a callback function. So whenever the server request comes back, this is what's going to happen, and it's got the data that was passed back. So this simple code, it would just take whatever data comes back and stick it into a div on the page. Okay, so the user didn't have to stop and wait for it. We didn't have to run a refresh. It happened asynchronously. Okay, and you know, a lot of times these AJAX functions will have an error handling property as well. So if something goes wrong, that callback will be triggered, and you can display a message and kind of help with troubleshooting. Okay. Now, also again, in the vein of just making sure the applications are responsive and not annoying the user, stopping and waiting. Another thing you can do when you kind of hit a practical limit for whatever reason of what you can do to make it faster, you can make it appear a little faster, or at least let the user know something is happening, so they're not sitting there just wondering, you know, what's going on. So with a quick demo for this. So in this case here, simple view panel. Let's say, you know, I've got a search button on here that all this does is just trigger a search, and it's, you know, tied into the search property of the data source. I click that, put a delay in here, but I don't know if actually something happened. I could be clicking it again a couple times because that's what people do. And it's waiting to come back, and it still doesn't seem to be responding. All right, so maybe that page timed out. Let's try this again. Okay, some clicking, waiting, but still also a good example that I didn't know something was happening. So the user by that time could have clicked it a few more times, which would actually have, you know, the opposite effect of slowing it down further. So, you know, that had a delay in it, but it's just not a good user experience that they don't know something is happening. Right now, better examples, if I click this, you know, I'm showing them that something happens so that they know it's active, and then it comes back, gone. Those two things had exactly the same delay built into them, but it didn't feel like it nearly as much the second time. Okay, so just a very simple usability thing, but it can go a long way towards improving perception of your applications. All right, so just simply, this is, you know, code that will do this. So all that did was those buttons just had a partial refresh on a view wrapper, so it's just a div that I stuck around the view, and then 2 lines of code here, which actually could be 1, that just gets the ID of the panel and uses Dojo to replace the view with an image. Okay, and then when the view refreshes, it just rewrites itself, and you don't even have to go back and clean it up. Okay, so that just goes a long way towards improving the performance and takes, you know, very little effort to manage. So along with this, you know, the vein of trying to process on the client side, minimize hits to the server. Also be aware, there's this syntax here that you can use to compute some information on the server and have it just written directly into your client-side code. So if you've ever seen this pound curly brace ID syntax, what that does is it'll kind of compute on the server as the page is rendered and give you the real client-side ID of an element that the XPages server generates, because it's not going to be what you started. You called it phone number 1. The server gave you view ID1, ID2, ID3, phone number 1. Okay, so that's just a very handy way to be able to get the real ID of the control so that you can access it with client-side JavaScript. But you can actually go further than that and use a JavaScript tag or some expression language, so that, say for example, you need the username. Right? You could have client-side code that has this pound curly brace JavaScript at username, and then when the server generates your page, it writes the user's actual name into that code, so you've got it available. You don't have to hit the server to go get it. It computed as the page was rendered, and now it's sitting there waiting for you. Okay. Just main thing to understand is that this type of syntax doesn't work inside of script libraries because it's part of the page rendering process. So if you need to kind of mix this together, what you would do is use that syntax on the page event and then pass that variable in when you call the server-side code.
And you'll forget that. So, like, yeah, right now, make a mental note to remind yourself that, yeah, because yeah, like that's like 4 hours of your life lost. You won't ever get that. Maybe just me.
It has to be within the XPages script. I mean, the tag library. If you have a script tag on the page, it's not going to render because it's not an XP colon.
Right. Absolutely. That's a very good point. Yeah, it's not going to run anything that's not an XP tag.
I'm always confused about this. So I can put this in the on page load event, whichever before render and you also have an output script that you can put things.
Mhm.
What's the difference between those two? Because it's always confusing.
Well, the output script evaluates to client-side JavaScript. So, so you could use syntax like that, and then when the page loads, it would be computed for you. So what you could do with that is to set up a global variable on the page or something. So var name equals, JavaScript, pound JavaScript at username, and then that way you could refer to that anywhere on the page
Yeah, but my question is, when does it calculate?
as the page loads.
As the page loads.
Yeah. So the on-page load event would be stuff that happens on the page load. An XP script tag could evaluate something that could stay global to the page, as opposed to just executing one time.
Alrighty, thank you, sir. So the next topic is server-side JavaScript, and that might confuse some of you based upon what I usually talk about as Java. Don't worry, it's coming. It's coming. So yeah, let's talk about that just a little bit. All the server-side JavaScript haters. I managed not to actually say anything about it, but so how many of you are the people who have evolved to Java? Yeah, and I think the statement was, you don't write any server-side JavaScript. So how exactly do you call your Java? Server-side JavaScript, right? Okay. So all those Java people that are out there that tell you that they say server-side JavaScript like that. Look, they're all server-side JavaScript developers, and I got news for you too. I know these people a long time. Before they jumped on the Java bandwagon, server-side JavaScript was the cat's pajamas. Let me tell you. So, what I really want to communicate to you here is the right tool for the right job, and SSJS isn't there for a reason. Okay? Do I use SSJS in my XPages solutions? Yeah, every one I've ever written. Okay, for some type of functionality. Now, do I do a lot of Java coding? Yes, I do. Okay. There are two tools in your toolbox. And what you don't want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, okay, well, I'm never ever writing another line of server-side JavaScript. You want to say, okay, well, what's the task? And then kind of get in and look at it that way. Just some quick tips about working actually with Eclipse. These are kind of some things that are nice. I work with a gentleman who will write some code and it'll stop working, and he'll go, open this thing and go look at this method. And I'll go, what's the line number? And he'll go, what line number? No, I don't. Just go to the search for this method. And I said, no, what's the line number? Because if you turn on line numbers and you show line numbers in your code, then all of your code in SSJS and Java and all the editors are going to have line numbers. And if they have line numbers, when you're talking to that gentleman on the phone, you can say line 785, and I can hit Control L, and I can jump to line 785. Okay? It took me a little while to train him on this, but once you've got him trained, it's a lot better. So this is also great for, I don't know, doesn't happen to me a lot, but if you get errors in your code, stack traces, they have a line number in the stack trace, and so you can just open up your code. Typically it's somebody else's code you're troubleshooting, right? Never yours, and you can jump directly to it. So just two quick little tips there. Something that is, we'll call this transitioning to Java, okay, from SSJS. So one of the things about working with XPages and Domino and the components on the page is understanding the underlying infrastructure a little bit. Every time you drop a component on an XPage, there's Java code and a Java class that supports that particular component. That's the API of that thing. Okay? So when you go in and you say, okay, well, I have a page and I have all of these things on it, okay, then I can go to the reference and the control declaration snippets, and then I can double click on any one of those things in an SSJS code window, and now I have access to the entire API of that component. And you're like, well, what good is that? Well, because a lot of times the API stuff is not the same as the attribute list and properties list that you see inside that bottom panel. Okay? And plus then it allows you to do some things programmatically, right? So you open that up, you go to your reference, control declaration snippets, double click, and you'll see that you get a var input text 1, whatever the name of the component is, IBM XSP component XP input text. That's the underlying API. You're like, well, what good is that? Why do I want to know that? Because that's the Java code. So guess what? If you're writing SSJS, you're already writing Java. Okay? You can put that on your resume. I've seen it done. But the primary benefit is I can now say input text 1 period, and then I get a list of methods. Okay? And I can then use that API to go through and do things like set values. Okay? Enable, disable things. We'll look at a couple examples of those. Okay? You know, set value from button. Okay? So how many of y'all have played with this? Okay? Yeah, some of y'all. Okay, if you haven't, then just create an XPage, put a button, an input text, a radio button, and then go and double click those, get them into SSJS and start looking at the methods. And the really great thing about that is when you transition to Java, if you haven't already done so, then these APIs are going to be much more familiar to you. Okay? And you're going to be able to get into this. I'm going to do the demo in a bit. Okay? One of the other primary benefits of any coding environment is the functionality of using libraries. Now, you may or may not have grown up in Domino, but I came from Domino where we create a form and we put a button on the form. And we put 19 lines of @function formula. That's a long time ago. But, and it does exactly what I want it to do. Okay? And so then I do what? I create form 2. To create form, wait a minute, I need that button that does that thing. So I go to form 1 and I copy the button and I copied it. So this is what Ehrlich was talking about is, now we have that button across 19 forms, and if you have to change it, it's like, oh, okay, maybe that's not going to really work the way I planned, right? So using libraries. And you're going to discover when you need libraries when you get back into that design pattern. That's a design pattern, by the way, copying functionality from one object to another to do the same thing. Yeah, no, that's a design pattern. It's not a good design pattern, but it is absolutely a design pattern. Right? Once you've been coding for a while, you're going to do that. Once the library is created, you can call it from anywhere within that application. Most common libraries needed is used for validation. They were talking about some validation earlier. When you wrote your very first XPage, just like when you wrote your very first notes form application, you did what? You validated on the field because there was a thing right there that said validate. And you're like, well, they want to put it there if they didn't want us to use it, right? And then you found that that was very inefficient, okay? Because basically, they submit and there's just one error. If I have to go fill out a web form where I submit and they tell me I didn't do something right, okay, and I fix it and I submit again and then they tell me I didn't do something else right, whatever it is, I'm doing it someplace else. Okay? So it's just a horrible user experience. Okay? So you want to kind of gather that all together. Best of all possible worlds is on the form itself, actually tell them what you expect. You can do that via HTML5. You can type text under the field. And just say, look, this is what you should input here. Okay? So versus telling them they didn't do it right. Right? My favorite is like phone numbers. Like I'll put in my phone number and they'll go, yeah, no, that's not the right phone number. And I said, okay, so then I'll put like a dash. And they're like, yeah, no, that's not right either. And so then you spend 16, finally I get parentheses and the dash and they're like, oh, okay, that's good. You could have told me that the first time. Right? So what we want to do is some validation. Exactly. Right. So just lazy web developers. Expand the code section, script libraries, new script library, provide a name, set type. The type cannot be changed once the library is created. If you create an SSJS library, you can't convert that library to Java. Okay? In your preferences, you can also, like every time you create a new agent or a new library, in the preferences, you can tell it the type of library you want to create. You want to force yourself to learn Java and use Java, go change your preferences so that every time you create something, it defaults to Java. Okay? That'll be something that'll help. Okay? And so you're going to create those functions that provide the functionality needed. A lot of times, and we just Brad had that tip, and I talked about it. This is where it bit me. Is I had this function working in the XPage perfectly. It was great, and I'm like, well, this should be a library. So then I copy it to a library and I invoke the library and it goes, yeah, no, that doesn't work. Well, then I do what all good developers do. I copied it back to the XPage. I ran it. It worked perfectly. Copied it back to the library. Ran it. It didn't work. So, scratch my head for a little while and, kick the dog and then, find out that, oh, that's not how that works. So, we're going to pass things into the function from the XPage itself. Okay? Add the library to the XPage. Once it's there, all the functions defined in the library, you have the ability to then use those. You have server-side JavaScript as well as client-side JavaScript libraries you can create. Okay, so you can write any of those functions, drop those in there. Okay. Once it's there inside any SSJS window, then you're simply going to be able to go in and say rep value, do server validate. All you have to do is call the function name, okay? Because it gets added in, and then that's a function that's globally available anywhere on your page. Okay, so you can go and do that. Right. So, just some quick tips on JavaScript itself. Okay. If you're writing JavaScript, one of the unfortunate things about JavaScript is how forgiving it is. And so you can write some really poorly formatted JavaScript, and it'll probably run most times. Okay, but you're making the underlying JavaScript engine work harder. If you do just these 3 things every time in your JavaScript will be better than probably 80% of the JavaScript that's in the wild today. Okay? Always use a var statement. Okay? But it's not required. No, I just said it was required. Always use a var statement. And if someone asks you why, you say, well, because Paul said so. And so, do what I say, not as what I do. Terminate with a semicolon. But I don't have to. No, you really do. Okay? Because if you don't, then you're leaving it up to the JavaScript engine to figure it out. And then it does parse your code multiple times. And that's a performance issue.
Okay.
Yep.
A real quick question about that, because I'm always confused, like on an if statement, where do you put semicolons there? Do you put what within?
Anything that has brackets does not require that.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So just like at the end of all statements.
Okay.
Okay. So it's statements versus procedures.
Because I've seen them both ways, and
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah. So typically we don't need them in there. Okay. Although I could have put semicolons there actually.
That's what
Inside the statement.
That code sucks.
You did say do as they say, not as they
Do as I
say.
say, and as I actually did. Is this your code, Brian? Always use a return statement. Yep.
I sometimes, or most of the time now, I put the colon and then the type string in notes document view, partly because it gives me type ahead of it's a notes thing, and I like type safety. What's the opinion on that? I see some people doing it, some people not.
Be consistent. That's the only thing. So
do
yeah,
all the
if
time.
I'm actually calling notes objects, I do the same thing. Okay. So you put it in the type, and that's also a little bit easier when you're copying this code to a Java function. You know the type of object it ought to be. Okay. So yeah. All right. Okay. Right. Let's see if it actually works though. That would be fun. All right. So. Don't laugh how many pairs of glasses I have. You'll get old one day. You'll do the same thing. All right. So we transitioned there. So we're on our Asgard server. Nick Fury's logging in. Good stuff. So a couple of things, and to follow up kind of with what Brad said. We can put a value in here, and we can just click a button. There's not a lot of, oh wow, look, users like that. Users like when you click a button and something happens. Okay, you can set a field value. Okay, you can click it, get things from other places, go do things. So Brad said, you have the issue where, oh, well, the user just, they click the button, and so then you tell them you click me. Okay, and oh, wait a minute, I'm working on it. Just chill out, right? And then you go one more time. And then I'm done with you. Okay? So, I warned you. Now that button doesn't work. I'm telling you that I probably lost a lot of business this way because this is a standard practice for me. Look, you press me. Chill out.
Design pattern.
get a sip of coffee, do something, okay?
Go to lunch.
Right, okay?
Can I get that library?
As a matter of fact, you can. It's right here. So you can do things like the number of selected documents in a view, okay? And all of this is going to be done, via those features that we talked about. Getting a field value. So var input text, com equals, and again, this is all done simply by going into your reference and going into your control declaration snippets. It looks at all of the things that are on there, and you can then simply pick one. Okay, button 5, and now I have a variable button 5, and I can say then I want to say button 5. Yeah, dot. Okay. Okay.
Back off that 13.
Yeah, he needs to spell button correctly.
There's a critic in every I swear. Button, this is why I don't do like this. Right.
Change my can't change classes again.
It's a tough crowd, let me tell you. So, and then you get all the pop-up, and then again, these are going to be, and you may have no clue what these things do, but a lot of them are pretty intuitive about what they do. Okay, and then this is going to start exposing you to the underlying Java API for these components. And when you start thinking about that, then you can start thinking about, well, maybe I want to extend that component. Maybe I want to create my own component. That's a little out there, but it's available to you as an option. All right. So, setting a field value, that's the same thing. Go do that. Set the value. Versus getting the component, it's just an alternate way to write values out there. This is the magic code that will keep users from being stupid. Right? And you just keep track of those things. And again, this is one of the things that API allows you to do, because now you're actually interacting with the component object model. Okay? So more functional things, again, are going to be like the number of selected documents. Okay, this is actually something real. So if I can get the number of selected documents, then I have an array that I can process, and then I can actually go and get the, not only the ones that were selected, get the number that's selected, but actually get the selected documents as an array, and then I can process just the selected documents. We do this all the time with report engines. So, click, 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 boom, create a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet of the things I just selected, right? And so, again, kind of highly functional there. We then have, let's look at the Poison view. In the person view, then I want to create a new person record, and then I want, when I submit that, I don't want to do incremental validation. I want to validate the entire thing. And I tend to prefer to do this in SSJS on server side versus client side. But we want to give them a list and say, hey, look, it can't be empty. And this is also an excellent place. If you're giving them this message, this is a place where you could also tell them, and by the way, you should format your field this way, because I was too lazy to, parse it and format it myself. And it doesn't matter what order things are done in. So if I come in and say this is Atlanta, and they try to submit again, then the city just falls out of the list. But they know each of those things. You can put these messages right next to the fields as well, or underneath them, or you can have it a list at the bottom. But that's all going to be done via the API. So if we take a look at the person document, submit. So we're doing some stuff here in the person document. Basically, in a function, if I return false, it just stops. Okay, so like in this submit, I'm returning false, and then it doesn't complete. It doesn't actually do the submit function, which is, I hate the user experience where they click submit, they go to another page, and then they have to go back to that page. Yeah, so this is just going to say, we're not even going to submit. And all we're doing is we're getting a field name array and a UI name array. And the reason for that is that we want friendly names in our messages. So over here, we don't want it to say, fname 75 cannot be empty, because they're like, I don't know what that is. All right? So you just create two arrays. You pass both those arrays to the function. And that particular function is going to be over in your code under script libraries, the SSJS validation. We'll open that up. And again, this is not, hugely great code. but it does that. It's going to function, process each of those arrays. Com name, get component field, UI names. We're using the Java XPages message. That's another one of those underlying things. There's a component on an XPage called the messages component, and this is the underlying Java code that you can manipulate that with. We set a severity. We said this is the summary. It can't be empty. And then validation error and the error message. Is error is equal true, and we return an error. Okay? If all of the fields pass validation, then it gets submitted. Okay? So you can do some very specific validation messages too. You can actually test for the field name and give different responses based upon that particular field name.
This is going for the value. You're testing against value. If it's a combo box or anything like that, it's not going to have an issue with that.
No, it works with combo box, state fields, everything. Yeah, this particular program. So.
And the message area is on every Java server. That's part of the
That's part of the JSF API. That's just a standard part of the JSF API.
I'm just going to give a plug to an X snippet that I posted a while back that basically takes that thing but puts it in messages right near the fields.
Yeah, I think I use that all the time. So similar thing, I have validation libraries that have a function in there, post validation message, and it will attach it to the right field, and then you've got the message, it knows when to show it. So extremely handy. I get a lot of use out of that. All right, so next I want to talk about modifying the output of components, because a lot of times XPages has a certain output that it gives you for every kind of component you put on a page, but a lot of times it's not exactly what you want, or you need to enhance it for some reason. So we're going to look at some ways to do that. First one is a very simple one. There's a tag name property on computed fields or panels. Okay, now by default, a computed field will give you a span tag, and a panel will give you a div tag. But there's actually this tag name property, and you can change it. So as opposed to computing a field, setting it to be not escape, so it's HTML, and writing code that writes HTML, you can actually just tell it, give me a different tag. Okay, now there's only a few choices in this list here, but you can type anything in there that you want. Okay, so I see this, a lot of times, say, using font awesome, and it wants an I tag to show something. You just go in there and put I as the tag name, and then that's what it writes out. So then all you have to do is give it a class name, and you've got a font awesome icon. You don't have to write code that writes code. Okay, much simpler, much easier to maintain, understand. Now the converse of that is that actually you can turn off the output tag on some controls. And you can do this on a computed field or a repeat or a panel. For computed field, it doesn't really make any sense, because if you disable the output tag, then you don't have any output. But for a container control, like a repeat or a panel, it'll give you a surrounding div tag and then whatever you told it to show up inside there. So sometimes if that causes a problem, I know one thing that comes to mind is, using a couple of applications, jQuery UI's drag and drop sorting lists. Okay, so put something in a repeat panel, you want to give the user the ability to drag and drop to resort those items, but the div tag that the repeat generates kind of messes up the selectors that it's expecting, so you just disable the output tag and that takes care of that. Okay? Now just be aware, obviously, if you turn off the output tag, you then cannot target that for a partial refresh because it's not there. Okay, another thing you sometimes want to do is put a class on the body tag of the page. I know with Dojo this happens a lot. You need to define a certain theme if you want to change it, and it wants that tag up on the body of the class. So there's no specific tag for the body of an X page, but if you select the view tag of the X page itself and set the style class, it will put that class on the body tag of the page for you. Now just realize that only works at the X page level. If you're on a custom control, it's just going to put a class on a div that surrounds it, because it's not at the body level. I know this is very handy, control attributes. Maybe not as common to use, but now as things move more towards HTML5, or if you're using jQuery or other UI libraries, a lot of times now they're looking for attributes and not classes to find things. So fortunately in XPages controls we have this ATTRs property, and you can add as many attributes as you want. So they're basically just name value pairs, and when you add an attribute, in the source of the X page, it will have an XP attribute name value, and then when it actually generates that, you've got my attribute equals my value. Okay, so it just puts it as an attribute right inside the tag that it sends out. So this is extremely handy, and I find myself using this, more and more as time goes on, as you're looking to take advantage of, other plugins and libraries and HTML5 functionality. So just as a quick example of this, this Dojo stuff is available already on the server. You can have this digit title pane. So if you were doing this in pure HTML, you would just have a div tag, you'd have a data dojo type, and you'd have a data dojo props. Okay, so that's pure HTML, that's how you do it. If you want that in XPages, you just create yourself 2 attributes, data dojo type, data dojo props. You get the same exact output. Okay, so the good news is with this is then you can easily then just find somebody did an example, here's how you make this widget. And then you can just create your own attributes on a div or some other control to have it pick that up. Now there's another attribute, or an attribute of attributes. You can tell them to be minimized. So sometimes, a lot of times for selectors, the code is only looking that an attribute exists. It doesn't really care if it has a value or what that value is. Very minor thing, but in this case, if you set minimize to true, you just have the attribute added to the output tag. You don't need a value just because it doesn't matter. So it just minimizes the clutter a little bit, no confusion. Although the confusion kind of comes in because XPages will require that you define a value anyway, even though it's not going to send it out. So be aware of that, but that's just another thing to kind of clean up the output a little bit
Is
more.
that valid HTML5?
Sorry?
Is it valid HTML5 if you don't have a property value?
I'm not sure. But I know that a lot of libraries and selectors are just looking for the existence of it, so you don't need it. Okay. Now, if we're talking about modifying, the output of stuff on XPages, themes come into play in a big way with this. Now, you can use them to include some libraries and style sheets and things like that. But, if we're talking about adjusting the output for, the current user situation, you can do things like conditionally render a style sheet based on, what the browser type is. Of course, all these statements are really just going to be is IE, fix. But just realize that as of when this first came out, the is IE checks did not work with IE11 because they decided to change their user agent string. So there is an X snippet out there that will help to pick that up. And one thing, again, I find I'm using a lot more as a lot of applications are built with Bootstrap front ends. Another cool thing you can do in theme is apply classes to elements. So if in this theme I could say, give me every edit box and add the form control class to it, this really helps to keep my code a lot cleaner. I don't have to go onto every single field in the design if I'm doing a Bootstrap application and add that form control class everywhere on every field, on every form throughout the application. I can set it up in the theme and it's taken care of. Right, so we need one of these for input box. You can do a separate one for a multi-line input box, a separate one for combo boxes. But you can handle that in one place. Code is cleaner, and you don't have to worry about forgetting it in some fields that end up coming out looking differently. So it's extremely handy. Now, converters are another thing in XPages that help you kind of modify what you're seeing. Now, they're not modifying the tags themselves. Converters are for dealing with the data. Okay. Now, whether you realize it or not, you're using converters because every time you have an input field and you say this is a date or this is a number, it's putting one of these XP convert tags on there behind the scenes. So that handles kind of the formatting and data type of the data as it comes in and out. So converters are in there, but you can actually make your own. And there's a couple ways you can go about making custom converters. So if you need some kind of different format or way you want to organize your data, you can make your own converters and do that. So there's 2 properties that you can use SSJS to do it. There's getAsString and getAsObject. And one of those functions will get the value and handle what happens to change it before you see it. The other will handle what happens with the data before it's stored on the back-end document. Okay, so those are in there. If you do one, you have to do both, so you're handling the data back and forth. But just realize if you've got very specific formats that you need, you can make custom converters. And of course, you can write them in Java as well. So I've got a link here. Toby Samples wrote a great post about how to do that, getting started with custom converters in Java.
He's a smart guy.
Yes, he is. Now, taking it to the You know, the most extreme, if you want total control over tags and data, you can make custom renderers. Okay, now what you do generally with this is that you create a Java class, you extend the existing renderer, and then you have to register the renderer in the faces config of your application, and then you just tell your control, use this renderer. Okay, and that will totally take over all the output, all the data, and you can completely change what gets rendered for your page. And that's a far deeper thing than to try to cover here quickly. So here's a few links in here. Jesse Gallagher did a really good Notes in 9 episode on this, and there's a few other really good blog posts with examples for getting started with custom renderers. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Paul. Speaking of Java, professional segue.
It's a little segue. All right, so how many of you thought maybe possibly when you looked at the agenda and you saw, you know, bullet 5 here that you would learn everything you need to know about Java in the next 3 minutes? It's good to have hope. It is, yeah. Those are healthy people. Okay. We're not going to debate whether you should or should not learn Java. If you're working inside Domino, you need to learn Java, period. And I stand by that statement. I've actually stood by that statement for 20 years, okay? Which was, you know, because, you know, the first 10 years when I was screaming at the, you know, void saying, yeah, you should learn Java, you should learn Java, everybody was like, the formula language is fine. And I'm like, no, you should learn Java, you should learn Java. And they're like, no, we have LotusScript now. We don't ever have to learn another language ever, okay? So I'm going to jump to this slide here. Basically, if you've never heard of the TOB index, and what it is it basically polls the internet, the entire internet, okay? And it says what languages are being used to produce applications on the internet. Java is consistently in the first 2 positions, okay? It has been for 15 years, okay? So if you're going to continue working in the Domino ecosystem, then it just benefits you, okay, to learn this language. How many of y'all have tried to start learning Java and then didn't get anywhere with it? Right, okay. I'm raising my hand because, you know, I started 3 times to learn Java and I was just like, you know. So you get busy, you have a real job, right? Okay, those damn real jobs. So the thing to do is find something to apply it to. And the great thing is you've got a Java platform in Domino and XPages. And you know, by the way, it doesn't even have to be XPages. Okay, it can just be Java agents working with an API you're familiar with, which is the Domino object model. Okay, so find something, start using it. XPages is built upon a JSF JSP, and I'll digress just a little bit. You know, so someone said everything bad with XPages has to do, you know, with that, you know, 7-phase render model. Okay, so before I was working in Domino, I actually worked in a real J2EE environment. And that 7-phase model, okay, you know, that's kind of like the person who brings us to the dance. And it's got some caveats, okay, but you don't want to hate it, you want to learn to work with it, okay? You want to learn those dance steps, because that is always going to be there, okay? And guess what? If you went to WebSphere, okay, or you went to some other, you know, J2EE server, it's going to be there. Okay? And the more you know about it and how to bend it to your will, the better off you're going to be. Okay? So, and look, I said right there. Okay, and then I inserted an evil F. If you want to integrate XPages with non-Domino data, then you know, JDBC, JSON, XML. Okay, then you know, JSON again, or Java is just again the conduit that's going to bring you there. Java can't be added directly to an XPage, and that's kind of a barrier to an entry, because you're like, okay, well, there's not a code window in my XPage where I can type Java. You've got to create the Java some other place, okay, and then you have to reference it via SSJS, as a matter of fact. Okay, Java code does not interact with the UI, although there are UI functions, you know, in Java. Unless you're building a standalone Java application, you don't want those incorporated into your app. Variables are passed to the back end. They come from data prior to executing. Primary design pattern for executing this is going to be called Java code from an event like buttons or an X agent. How many have not heard of X agents? You've never heard the term X agent. Okay, we got a couple. All right. An X agent is a term we in the community coined for an X page that doesn't render anything. It has no UI components. Okay? We simply use the before render response event, okay, to go in and execute some code. Okay? Becomes a servlet at the end of the day. You know, that's basically what a next page is. You handle all the request response. All the code is either in the before or after render response, depending upon what you're doing. A lot of JavaScript frameworks require that source to be accessible by a URL. So I know that Brad's done a lot with it. I've been doing a lot with different grids, and you know, these JavaScript client grids expect a JSON stream, and the only way to invoke that JSON stream is via a URL. Okay, that's how you get it. So you create an XPage that's a URL that streams XML, that streams JSON into these objects. Okay? Third-party Java libraries, JDBC, Apache POI, Excel, Word document processing. Okay, you know, these are all standard. You know, if you've not done anything from Apache, or you're not familiar with the Apache Foundation, Apache is kind of, you know, Java's version of our, you know, OpenNTF. So when you go to look for code for Domino, what do? You go to OpenNTF.
Right.
Okay? When I need something done in Java, I go to Apache because someone's written it. Somebody out there is taking care of it. Okay? So creating an X agent, there's no magic. You create an X page, turn rendered to false, disables the output stream. You can actually document, I use the D word, okay? Your X page, X agents up here because none of this gets rendered. So you can actually, you know, be very verbose in what this thing does. Okay? Then put your before render response generally is where that code's going to come. Import Java code if needed. JSF components, response type, call methods of the code, close the response object. That's kind of really important. Okay? So a couple things. How many of y'all have ever had the need to take Domino data without writing to the hard drive and just stream it out as text, Excel, Word, XML, right? Pick whatever that thing is on the, okay? This is what this particular design pattern really is, you know, really good for. Okay? So don't say anything about me changing my glasses. I'm like Superman. Hey now. So let's kind of pictures being 1,000 words here. We're going to export these person documents, and I'll talk about some resources in just a little bit. But basically, I've got the person view, and I click this export button, and notice that it just pops up the, okay, what do you want to open this with? I'm not writing any data to the hard drive. Okay? This is all happening in memory. But depending upon the browser they're using, they'll get some variation of what do you want to do with this file. And then they can download it. I'm going to open this XML file with WordPad because the default was the Virus Portal Internet Explorer. Okay? So, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that's not really cool because most people don't want XML. Okay, but I can take that XML, I can take that same XML, and I can feed it to an Apache POI process, and I can create an Excel spreadsheet. Okay? Did I mention all the Apache POI stuff is open source? And that's, you know, synonymous with free. Okay, so you can create PDFs, you can create Excel spreadsheets, you can create Word documents, okay, directly out of your Domino data. And again, the design pattern here is not, you know, necessarily complex. So if we go to export person documents, I am in a script library. Why am I in a script library? Export person documents. There we go. A little button. Okay. And again, in the onClick event, click here to create these. Then I'm doing a redirect to XAgent XSP. And XAgent XSP is my XAgent. If I open up XAgent XSP, then I look at the particular code, then what we're doing, because we set rendered to false, is we're going out and getting the page response and the page output stream. Okay? And that's the magic of not having to write anything to disk. So we're then going to call this thing called export to XML. We pass our session, and we pass the output stream. Okay? We then create our headers. We give it a file name, page output flush and close, and then we say faces context response complete. Now if we go look at the Java code that we're actually invoking, then here we take the session and the output stream, and then this is primarily domino code. You know, I'm going to get the session, I'm going to get the person view, I'm going to get the first document. I'm going to start writing out some XML. This could just as easily be writing out JSON, okay? Or, you know, if you're really, really old, CSV. Ouch, okay? And then in a while loop, I just say, you know, go get those things, recycle, because that's important, XML append, and then XML file out, output stream, XML file out. I just output to that file stream the XML out2 string, and we get the bytes of that because streams are always byte based. We flush it and close it. That goes back to the X page, and then the user gets prompted. You know, what do you want to do with this particular file? Okay. And so just to not put too fine a point on it, why is it important that we tie that particular thing in with Java? Well, because we just can't do that in anything out of the box in Domino. Okay? So if you're a developer, you get requirements where the people come and say, I have a list of data. I want this to be automatic. I want to push a button and get an Excel spreadsheet. Make that happen. And you go, okay. So you start looking through the Domino API, and guess what? There's not a magic create Excel spreadsheet function in the Domino API. And so then you're like, okay, well, what are my options? And yeah, there's some COM objects that allow you to do it through Lotus script, okay? But at the end of the day, what you're utilizing is a Java infrastructure, okay? And so, we're going to talk about some resources that are available, that are going to help you learn Java at the end here, Java and JavaScript. So that's something you should definitely put on your radar if you have not done so
I've got a quick question about XPages. I can't remember, is there a property in the XPage that has to be set as well? So
you have to set rendered to false.
Right, okay.
And that's in the slide. So.
Should be that view state probably must be what you should set.
View state?
Yeah. Toby's blog.
Oh, we're already there?
Yeah. Okay, I guess we'll open up if you guys have some questions.
Would you go to the resources?
Sure.
Just real quick. So this happens to me once a month. Is I want to test some functionality against a large data set, and I look at my directory, which has 2 people in it, me and Jean-Ann, and I'm like, that's not really going to work. Okay. This allows you to generate JSON, XML data, CSV. You just put in some parameters and you tell it, I want 500,000 records. Boom. And then you have an XML stream or a JSON stream of 500,000 people. And randomized data. So then you can import that. There's code in the database that I'll post that does the import. So you can see how I basically just took the XML and I imported it in to create Domino documents. And then I reversed that and I pushed XML back out. Code Beautify is nice for your JavaScript. Just go ahead and applaud right now for David Leedy. If you haven't spent any time at Notes in 9, then I'm just going to have to say you're close to retirement and you don't care. Okay? Because that's stuff that will save your job and save you time in doing it. Okay. So the episode guide is excellent. TLCC's in the room. Howard, what's here? Oh, there he is. They do courses that are delivered to your desktop that run inside of your Notes client that will teach you Java in the Notes client, Java in XPages, okay? Stuff about the extension library.
Oh,
so
you got to mention
resources.
you created some of those.
That's kind of self.
Including
Yeah,
the Java.
I did write all their Java courses, so those are there. That's not working. Oh, you did it. If you want to learn, I would say anything. If you've never done anything with the Head First books, A, when you're done, you'll know it. And B, they're just funny. Okay? And you can't really say that about learning a technology too often. Okay? This is Brad's blog. Again, much like Notes of 9, if you want to learn things from smart people, then you need to spend some time on Brad's blog. Great stuff. He did a great job, both of these. When I was looking at the GridX stuff and comparing everything, it was invaluable to me to look at that stuff, so that's great. And I think that's it. Those are all the resources. So thank y'all very much for spending your afternoon. Hang around as long as y'all want for questions, or you can go eat. One of the two. That's your choice.
Where can we get the sign back?
I'll post it.
We did that.
So you're not recording ours?